pleased to open our 2020 annual conference with a conversation with incoming NASA President Lisa Hopkins. So for the next 20 minutes or so, Lisa and I will discuss her views on issues of interest to those who follow the work of NASA and individual state and provincial securities regulators in the US, Canada, and Mexico. And we'll get to learn a little bit about Lisa. So let's get started. I know people are interested in learning who will be joining you on NASA's leadership team this year, Lisa.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in, and a special thanks to our membership for giving me this opportunity to serve. I will do my best to make sure your faith in me was not misplaced. You know, Chris, our members are amazing in terms of their commitment, knowledge, and experience. And certainly I think our leadership team this year exemplifies those qualities. So without any further ado, I'll jump, as you say, right into it. Joining the board this year as our president-elect is Melanie Lubin. Congratulations, Melanie, and I very much look forward to working closely and collaboratively with you over the year ahead. Joining the board will be Leslie Van Buskirk, and returning are Andrew Hartnett, Bill Beatty, Claire McHenry, Travis Isles, Kevin Hoyt, and last, but certainly not least, Chris Gerald, to be our soon-to-be past president. I also want to take a moment to thank Tanya Sala for all of her work on the board. Tanya's term on the board is over, but I have always enjoyed, Tanya, your insights and perspective, and I thank you for all of that. And before we move any further, I want to thank all of our section chairs in advance. I have been a section chair, and I know what a heavy lift it is, so I thank you for all of the hard work you're about to get yourselves into.
Well, that's fantastic, Lisa. You have an exceptional leadership team this year joining you, and I know you're going to have an outstanding year. And I want to learn about some of the issues that are going to be impacting you this year, as well as your priorities. But before we get there, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, the Securities Commission of West Virginia, and the State Auditor's Office as well?
Sure, Chris. Very briefly, I grew up in both Massachusetts and West Virginia. And when I graduated from law school, I was drawn to the state of West Virginia, both for its beauty and because of the kindness and generosity of its people. So I was in private practice for about 7 years, and then I was very fortunate to join the West Virginia State Auditor's Office and a tremendous group of colleagues. The Securities Commission is a division of the Auditor's Office, and in the mid-2000s, I was put in charge of that division. And I just have a tremendous staff I'm very grateful for. So I would also just like to take a moment and say thank you to my colleagues at the State Auditor's Office and my staff at the Securities Commission, and a particular thanks to the West Virginia State Auditor, J.B. McCuskey. All your support and encouragement has meant the world. Thank you.
Well, looking ahead, Lisa, what are some of your priorities for NASA this coming year?
Well, certainly, Chris, I hope to follow your leadership and be a strong investor advocate and support our membership. After that, I think it's important that we recognize the elephant in the room. We're in the midst of a pandemic. So we have a working group that the board has just formalized into a board level committee, and we will continue to focus on initiatives and issues related to the pandemic. In terms of policy, we will continue to focus on private market expansion and Reg BI implementation. And finally, last but not least, certainly by any means, we will be focusing on engagement and inclusion. Not just with our membership, but also with other regulators, industry, investors, and particularly those investors who have been underserved.
Well, you certainly have a full agenda. I'd like to ask you about each one of these individually, starting with, as you said, the elephant in the room. You and I share the unique experience of leading NASA during a global pandemic. How is NASA responding, and what have you learned from this experience so far?
Well, I I agree with you, Chris. This is certainly a unique experience, and I hope that you and I are NASA's only two pandemic presidents. But that being said, adaptation, I think, is the first thing I've really learned through this experience. Here we are, you and I, we're sitting here having a fireside chat, and there's no fire. And really, there's nobody here in my room to chat with. So definitely adaptation. I think our membership have shown a lot of adaptation during this time period. In March, most of our members pivoted to a remote environment. And despite the challenges they faced, all of the licensing, compliance, and enforcement work continued. In fact, you'll hear, I'm not sure whether it's today or tomorrow, but you'll hear of a new initiative that the enforcement section has come up with in this space. So adaptation, I'm very proud of our members for what they've done in that regard. We also began the COVID-19 working group, which I mentioned earlier, to assist industry in serving their customers and to help our membership to meet the remote challenges that we've been facing. And I'm very glad to say that the board did just formalize that into the, better make sure I get this acronym right, Crisis Planning and Recovery, or CPR, board level committee. And that committee will continue to focus on all things pandemic related, particularly best practices, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and we're interested in hearing from folks, both within our membership and within industry, of what's worked and what hasn't worked. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to really move forward together in that space. So the second thing I think I've learned, besides adaptation, is the need and the value for collaboration and teamwork. I think we're in the midst of a paradigm shift, if you will, of how we work, certainly remotely and not in offices and various home spaces, but also how we view work. And I think this paradigm shift will result, and I hope it will result, in fewer silos and more bridges. I think some examples of that that NASA has had this spring, we've worked very collaboratively with FINRA on online exams, getting remote testing opportunities available for folks. And I think that's been a successful collaboration. We've also worked with SEC and FINRA to produce investor alerts, and that's been very successful. So I hope that these opportunities for bridges and collaboration will continue, not just during the pandemic, but long after the masks come off.
I absolutely agree with you, Lisa. Collaboration is essential, not only with fellow regulators, but also with external stakeholders, including financial professionals in the regulated community. And I know you feel the same way too.
Absolutely, Chris. We are stronger and more effective when we collaborate towards common goals. I think a prime example of that is the Act to Protect Vulnerable Adults. That is really a win-win between industry and regulators. It allows both groups to prevent fraud and to protect the most vulnerable. And quite frankly, the Act is working. 28 states thus far have adopted the Act, and I'm hopeful that more will in the near future. Of the states that have enacted it, I think in 2018, there were 426 referrals from industry, and in 2019, that number jumped to 709. So it's a tremendous example of a win-win synergy of opportunities and interests. I also want to mention, I'm very proud to say that West Virginia has also just enacted the Model Act, and we've already had our first referral. So again, as we move forward, we want to explore more opportunities for synergy in the future. We want to hear from you.
Well, that's fantastic. As you know, the strength of NASA is really in its membership. The state, provincial securities regulators throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Certainly the army of volunteers that NASA has working to advance its mission. Our member agencies cover the spectrum in size from small offices to large agencies with hundreds of employees. What is your message to our members in the smaller agencies or at the smaller agencies?
Well, Chris, it's just been an amazing opportunity to work closely with you this past year. And one of the things that I've noticed is there may be a small difference in size between New Jersey and West Virginia. And I think that's sometimes informed our opinions and our perspectives on things. I'm fond of saying where you stand depends on where you sit. And so, yes, we have a number of members, many that are small in stature, but mighty in terms of purpose and results. And NASA has great tools for its members, but it's not a one size fits all. And we want to make sure that our tools are right sized for all of our members. And we also want to make sure that we're inclusive of all of our members' perspectives and experience.
That sounds wonderful. And now, turning to matters of policy, you and I both share concerns about federal efforts to expand private markets. Could you tell us about that and your plans for this year?
Well, certainly, Chris, we all support responsible capital formation. But expansion of private markets without commensurate regulatory tools or transparency is troubling, and it's a potential breeding ground for fraud. I think, unfortunately, the new accredited investor definition was a missed opportunity in that regard. But yes, we will be monitoring this situation very closely in the year ahead, and I have great confidence in our corporate finance section led by Mike Pichek, as well as our Federal Legislation Committee chaired by Claire McHenry, and they will make sure that we are up to breast on all initiatives as they occur, and that NASA's viewpoints are advanced.
That's fantastic. Turning to what was the biggest issue facing regulators and other stakeholders alike, regulation best interest. It's been in effect for 2 months now. NASA and state securities regulators were active advocates for raising the standard of care for broker-dealers. I know it's early, but what are your thoughts on the rules, initial implementation, and any possible NASA response?
Well, I think we're going to gauge the effectiveness of the implementation for investors. As I'm sure everyone knows, we have a board-level committee, Reg BI Implementation Committee, chaired by Andrea Site. That is a fantastic, dedicated group. They had a coordinated sweep in February, which basically took a snapshot of the industry practices in 2018. And that will be a benchmark moving forward to see how effective the implementation is in addressing certain challenges that their coordinated exam revealed. And I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder and say what those challenges were. I know that the Reg BI session comes right after this, and I'm sure you'll hear quite a bit more about that going forward. But, the next exam will see how those challenges were addressed. So stay tuned.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that next panel and some of those results. I would like to turn to an area in which NASA has devoted significant attention, the use of technology to develop and provide resources for its internal and external stakeholders. We made some real significant advances this year, and I understand you are going to continue the focus, the association's focus and attention on technology.
Well, Chris, we live in a tech world, and some of us have embraced it. Others have been drawn kicking and screaming to the party. But certainly NASA has always been advancing our position in this space. I think a great example of that is the EFD system. It took basically a snail mail, paper-based filing system and made it electronic. And issuers, I think, and regulators love it. Since its inception, there have been approximately 440,000 Reg Ds filed on the system. And subsequently, when UITs were brought on board, there have been, I think, around 35,000 of those. So the system is working, and it's a very valuable tool. In fact, just during the pandemic, The steering committee switched horses very quickly. Talk about adaptation. They created the universal filing type, which has allowed issuers to file a broad range of filing types on the system. And that was very valuable to both issuers and regulators who were both trying to figure out how do we get these filings in a remote environment. So that was a fantastic initiative by our EFD steering committee, and I want to commend the committee and Bill Beatty, the chair of that committee, for their great leadership in that area. So we're looking forward in the future to mutual funds and franchises coming on board. So stay tuned for further developments.
Well, it certainly sounds very exciting. We are running a little low on time, so I do want to wrap up our discussion with a topic of personal interest, not only to you, but to many in the audience. Certainly the events of this summer have led to a lot of questions and discussions about diversity, equity, inclusion. What do you and NASA think could or should be done in this area?
You know, this is a very important issue, and it deserves thoughtful and ongoing dialogue. And we have already begun to engage with stakeholders, both internal and external. We plan on listening carefully and then engaging meaningfully. If there is a role for regulators in the solution, we want to be there. So I don't have any particular initiatives to discuss right now because we are in the engagement stage. But stay tuned in this space as well. I think that you'll see some movement in this area in the near future.
What is it about NASA that has motivated you to assume this important office?
You know, I have been influenced by so many members, both past and present. I can recall, you and I have talked, Chris, about the fact that our membership meetings, that we have this big square table and we sit around the table in alphabetical order. And so for so many years, I sat next to Patty Struck from Wisconsin. And Patty would turn to me almost every meeting and look over her glasses and say, "And Lisa, when will you run for NASA president?" And I would look at Patty kind of askance and think to myself, that is never going to happen. So I learned two things from that experience. Number one, never say never. And number two, Patty Struck was always right. But another past member I can think of who really influenced and really started my path to this position was Shanita Boucher. And Shanita one day tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Lisa, you need to join the IA section." And so I did. And from there to here, you know, it's funny. Barry Glennon, our member services chair, our colleague from New Hampshire, is fond of saying it's the personal touch that makes the difference. And I think that was certainly true for me. And I think it's true for most of our members. And particularly in these challenging times where we're perhaps a little isolated, working remotely, the personal touch makes all the difference. And I hope we have more of that in the weeks, months, and years ahead. In terms of current members, you know who you are, who have encouraged me to seek this role and believed that I had something important to share. And I thank you for your faith in me. And finally, I do want to once again mention the state auditor of West Virginia, J.B. McCuskey, because he has actually been an advocate for me to take this role. And I could not, as you said, the heavy lift of this position, I could not undertake it without his encouragement and support. So thank you once again, JB. And thanks to all of our membership and thanks to you, Chris, for your mentorship this year.